team of churches to our general election hustings tonight. It's good to have you all here, and I am delighted to welcome all of the parliamentary candidates for Cheltenham. We have Alex Chalk for the Conservatives, George Penny for Labour, George Ridgeon for the monster Raving Loony Party, and Max Wilkinson for the Liberal Democrats. In recent weeks, as you will have seen in papers and elsewhere, a number of organisations and individuals have been speaking about the way in which we talk to one another during debates and campaigns like this. Amongst them, the Joe Cox Foundation and the Bishop of Gloucester have both spoken about the importance of the tone we set when we campaign, of the need to enable constructive debate and to defend the dignity of our opponents. Democracy, it would seem, is not only about the mechanics of voting, but also about learning to disagree well and to seek the common good. I hope that tonight in our conversations we will be able to observe some of those quite reasonable ways of talking with one another. And I hope that how we behave here will set a good example for those who would like to represent us in Westminster. In a moment, I will be asking the candidates to make 3 minutes opening speeches. I will then be asking them questions which you have submitted, and for each of those questions, I'll call out the name of the person who asked that question. We'll have a microphone which will come to you. Then please stand up, ask your question, and then each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer before we move the microphone onwards. I have just spoken for 2 minutes, and if a vicar can do it and can shut up, then I think our politicians ought to be able to do it as well. Oh no, you won't, says George. So let's begin with our opening statement from Alex Chalk. Thank you. So how do I switch it on? It's on.
Hello. Well, first of all, Nick, thank you very much for inviting me, and this is it's a real privilege to be here. Can I say, politicians are fond of saying that this is the most important election in a generation. Well, this one really is. And you know what? Cheltenham is going to play an absolutely critical role. Because now that the Liberal Democrats have said that they would not prop up a Conservative minority government, even if that was the only way to stop Labour taking power, it means that the options here and the implications in Cheltenham are very, very significant indeed. Cheltenham will have a disproportionate influence. Now, on the issue of Brexit, it's no secret I was a Remainer. I didn't just vote for Remain, I campaigned for Remain. But I believe this is the right thing to do to move forward with a deal in good order. And if you just consider the alternatives, to revoke wouldn't, I'm afraid, draw a line under this. It would pour petrol on the situation. And in terms of a second referendum, just think for a moment what that would mean. It would mean at least 6 months of an argument as the bill would make its way through Parliament, because of course there's no standing authority for one, subject to amendment. What would the question be? What would the franchise be? But the kicker is this. At the end of a 6-week toxic process which would divide communities and schools and workplaces and even dining tables, the losing side would not accept the result. If Remain won again, do you really think that Leave would just say, well, that's it, it's finished? And if Leave won, Remainers have already said, well, we wouldn't accept that. So I think we have to move forward as a country. And I want to start talking about the things that got me into politics in the first place, in social mobility, things we have to tackle in this town. We have 18 wards in the constituency of Cheltenham. 3 of them are in the bottom decile of income per capita anywhere in our country. That is what we have to be addressing. I believe in strong public services like our hospital, but I know they have to be sustainable. Sustained by a growing and vibrant economy which drives that social mobility and increasingly a green economy. It means we need to proceed in a way that is humane but also affordable. Because when we talk about justice, we mustn't forget generational justice too, to ensure that the next generation can enjoy the public services that we have and are not laden down with debt. On Cheltenham, I care passionately about this town. And I believe with every fibre of my being that we are on the cusp of a great future. We've stopped the rot at Cheltenham General Hospital, which was heading in the wrong direction for too long. Our schools are on the up, just look at the Progress 8 figures. The cyber park is coming, the air balloon. But all these things are only deliverable with a strong and influential voice in Westminster. Ask yourself the question, who is it who's best placed to pick up the call to the Secretary of State for Health or for Transport to say, I need you to intervene for Cheltenham. I need a result for our town. That is an important thing. So for a great future for our country, a great future for our town, I hope you will consider voting for me on the 12th of December. Thank you.
Good evening, and once again I want to say thanks to Nick and the whole team here for hosting us. I'm sure many of you, like I, watched over the weekend Channel 4's Dispatches programme, in which a young child explained the experience of having to rely on a food bank to eat, explained the experience of having to curl up in blankets to turn the heating off in the evenings to make sure there was enough money left to pay for food. The experience of having to go without basic things like electricity in order to make sure they could see it through the month. It was a documentary which Channel 4 should never have been able to make. This is the 5th largest economy in the world, and we should not see any person in our society homeless. We should not see any person in our society reliant on a food bank because their wages do not cover enough food for them and their children. And we have an opportunity to change that at this election. Over the last 9 years of a Tory Lib Dem coalition and then a Tory majority government, these things have got only worse. We have seen that homelessness has doubled. We have seen that over 800,000 food parcels had to be handed out by the Trussell Trust alone between April and September of this year in this country, an increase of over 700,000 over the last 9 years. But we have here an opportunity not just to undo these swingeing cuts which have seen this damage to so many ordinary people's lives. We have an opportunity to set a bold new future for this country, where we become a leader not just within Europe, but a leader internationally on the issue of climate change. The Labour Party has a fully costed plan to get us down to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, while at the same time transforming this country into an international leader in the latest technologies on climate change, developing new solar panel technologies, new battery technologies, and other technologies as yet undreamed of to allow us to combat this climate crisis. It's about investing not just in our technology and in our businesses, but also a policy which involves investment in our diplomatic service to restore the once great diplomatic power of Britain around the world and make sure that in the future we can be a leader on this and every other issue facing our planet. And it's about making sure that this is done by balancing the books not on the heads of those with the least to give, but with those with the broadest shoulders. By making sure that we pay for all this with tax rises only on the top 5% of earners and on large multinational corporations. By making sure that we only borrow for investment which will grow our economy, increase our tax receipts, and ensure that over time, this investment actually is a net gain for our country. It's about doing all this and more. And I could spend 5 hours, I could spend 5 days talking about everything the Labour manifesto has to offer. And so I'll spend these last few seconds to urge you. At this election, on the 12th of December, vote Labour, vote for a change in this country, and vote for the many, not the few.
My name is Ridgeon. 50 years ago, I was a Cheltenham fireman until a failed fire rescue in Gloucester. If you lose the magic phone, Google Gloucester Fire, 16th of November 1981, you'll see more. 9 months in Stoke Mandeville Stormy Unit and 3 very bad years not wanting to wake up every morning. Luckily, I had a few good friends and then meeting Dancing Ken Hanks. I'm Ken, will you help me raise money? This got me wanting to live again. This is why I'm standing in memory of Dancing Ken in Cheltenham. He's estimated he raised £1 million for Cheltenham and Gloucestershire charities, and we can give Cheltenham another £30,000 because I've got a £100 bet with William Hill, who used to sponsor Ken's deposit, and that's £30,000 to save me working there. I get none of that, I only get my £100 back, all to Cheltenham charities. In fact, I'd like to give some to each church in Cheltenham, depending how many there is, to help perhaps Christmas meal for elderly, disabled, homeless and lonely. And I did see a programme mentioning children homeless, perhaps some to Dr. Bernardo. There are so many charities £1,000 would do a lot of good for. I have strong links with Cheltenham because I was a butcher in Cheltenham Glos, and I took Cheltenham Tech for 5 years for meat technology and hygiene. I joined the Cheltenham Motor Club in 1964, promoting motorcycle sports as well as racing. And in 1968, December 68, joined the Cheltenham station as a fireman, doing many silly things for charity. As I said, I've done £100 bed 301. So there are 20,000 non-voters in Cheltenham. If you could persuade every non-voter you know, please do so. I'd like to see a fair country, especially Cheltenham. Part M, I went to London and the MP said after I put that houses should be made accessible over 20,000, and he said, we don't want to upset the builders. Aren't we a caring nation? Let's give Cheltenham a Christmas present of £30,000. And I've got a fire print here I can sell and give the money to St Phillips tonight, which I'll auction at the end. And my glasses fell off and I can't read my writing. But there's black posts in Cheltenham, top curves need doing. There's so much to do. But let's give Dancing Ken, who did so much for Cheltenham, let's give him a good send-off and raise 30,000 for Cheltenham charities. I'm time out.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, George. That was touching. Well, as I reflect, standing here in our final general debate during this general election, it strikes me that there is a clear and stark choice that has become clear to us all over the past few weeks of this campaign. It is whether we have a Boris Johnson majority government or a minority Boris Johnson government that is subject to checks and balances. And in Cheltenham, you're on the front line. And we need those checks and balances of Boris Johnson, because at this election we should be in no doubt that the Conservatives are in an alliance with the far-right Brexit Party. And if you don't, and that is chilling to our democracy. If you don't believe me, check page 48 of the Conservative Manifesto, which sets out in chilling terms the kind of things that they're going to do to some of the key tenets of our democracy, talking about the independence of the judiciary, the way that interacts with Parliament. And we already know that this is a man in Boris Johnson who is willing to close down Parliament when he doesn't like the scrutiny that he's being subject to. So here in Cheltenham, you are on the front line. You have two choices. You can vote for that hard-right alliance led by the Conservatives, or you can vote for the Liberal Democrats, who have a positive vision. I'm standing on a Liberal Democrat manifesto, which has a vision for public services, which includes proper investment in our NHS, so our hospitals are staffed with doctors and nurses who have the resources they need to look after patients. Proper investment in our schools, so we know that teachers and school leaders have the resources they need to deliver a proper education for our children. And on climate change, with a comprehensive and fully costed plan to deliver a carbon-neutral Britain. And of course, also stopping Brexit. And I stand before you as the Liberal Democrat candidate with a record of already delivering things in our town. On housing, I've secured £100 million for investment in housing for young people and families. On the environment, Cheltenham has declared a climate change emergency after my work on the local council. I've also ensured that Cheltenham is committed to a second referendum on the Brexit deal and for an internationalist vision which encompasses refugees and asylum seekers too. So the choice is clear and the choice is stark. At this election you can have an MP who is going to be a servant for Boris Johnson, backed by the hard right, or you can have me, an MP with a vision for a brighter future for our town, for our country and for our planet. Thank you very much.
Could we have our first question from Roe Bailey? Our first question from Roe Bailey. Could you put your hand up? Thank you. And James will bring the microphone down Faster than that, James. Faster than that, James. Got a lot of questions here.
If you are successful, how do you intend to improve our town?
Right. Goodness.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, look, as I said in my opening remarks, I think wherever you sit in the political spectrum, you have to have a plan for how you're going to address what I perceive to be a real burning injustice in our town. There are areas of relative affluence, we're in one now, but there are areas of entrenched generational poverty. I have always thought that one of the ways you unlock that treasure that exists in the heart of every man and every woman is to provide opportunity. And the reason why I've been so passionate about the cyber park, for example, is because I want to be able to say to a young person, look, don't have to go to Birmingham, you don't have to go to Bristol or Manchester or London. Here in Cheltenham, there is an opportunity for you to make something incredibly special of your life. And I think that could be incredibly valuable for our town. So I want to see better infrastructure to unlock that opportunity. But it's important too, because it's that thriving economy that can generate those fabulous public services. You need to support them with that economy. But the second thing also is it has to be sustainable. I introduced the net zero carbon emissions bill in Parliament because I believe that it is the single most important threat to our planet. There's a second one, by the way, which people don't talk about enough, which is antibiotic resistance. Why people don't talk about it in this campaign, I don't know, but that is incredibly important. So my vision for Cheltenham is of a thriving economy, unlocking the potential of young people, supporting services, to have a more, how can I put it, environmentally friendly town. I would love to see more people on bikes in a sustainable way, and for us to feel that ours is a future where the children particularly have opportunities in fantastic schools, but at the end they can come out knowing that Cheltenham is the place they can achieve their true potential. Thank you.
I think we've got a real opportunity at this election to change the direction of Cheltenham and make it a serious global leader on climate change, because, as Alex identified, there's a new cyber park being built there. And if I were MP, I would lobby and continuously lobby to ensure that that was actually a park built with a green industrial focus, one which took millions of pounds of investment from central government and in the forms of interest-free loans to new businesses to make sure that we could make that cyber park an absolute hub of tech development, of tech manufacturing and other green technologies for the future. It's also about making sure that our bus services and other services are improved. So the Labour Party wants to introduce new powers for local authorities to set up their own bus routes, but also to provide subsidy to existing private bus routes to make sure that bus prices can be brought down to everyone. New routes can be introduced, especially in rural areas, and existing routes can be made more regular. We'll also be protecting the over 65s bus pass, and where local authorities introduce new local authority-owned routes, there'll be an under 25s bus pass available as well. It's about making sure that the cycling infrastructure of this town is improved, and that there's a comprehensive and overarching vision of how we do transport in this town. It's about looking at introducing a park and ride system so that those coming to visit Cheltenham for shopping don't need to drive into the centre of town and navigate the difficulties that are seen there. But it's also about making sure that we reverse existing cuts to ensure our essential services like our hospital are protected, that the A&E service can be restored to a full 24/7 one, and that other components of the hospital like the cytology laboratory are protected from closure. It's about making sure that in future the investment is available and is there for the hospital to develop into an improved centre. Currently there are plans to expand the oncology department. It will cost about £12 million, and they're currently trying to raise that money from charitable donations. This should be money which is provided by central government, and there is a fund set aside by the Labour Party for that investment, and I would make sure that I lobby very hard to ensure that investment was brought here to our hospital to expand our existing oncology services. Thank you.
Thank you. Everywhere needs to be more accessible. I've already mentioned black post, drop curb. Planning officers have let slip a lot of properties built. They're supposed to be made accessible to Part M. Many of them have still got a step. I've been, over the years, trying to get new property, people making extensions, over £20,000. All you get for that is a small kitchen extension. To have a door made accessible, the government perhaps to help with VAT or a small grant, then more people would do this. Since 1970, there must be 12 million homes that had extensions in the country. If a quarter of them That's 4 million homes will be more accessible to the elderly and disabled. And this minister, when I finished my speech, said, we don't want to upset the builders. Various governments have relaxed building and planning regulations. There is now like the National House Building Corporate Company, which is in fact a private building inspector. When I rang him up about properties when I was doing a lot more because I was younger and a bit more energy, he said, we don't want to upset our customers, the builders. You are the customers of these building inspectors. Get empty property made for homeless and street sleepers. And look at the Grenfell Tower, they relaxed building regulation in the fire, and they have the cheek to blame the London Fire Brigade for letting people die. I made a mistake and broke my neck trying to save somebody's life. But we need to make sure it's a fairer society. Everybody, not just the rich or those with more needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, of course, this is a key question because Cheltenham is a lovely place to live, but it is not without its problems. And a few of the things I mentioned in my opening are still true now. So if we talk about the problems that Cheltenham has, it has houses which are too expensive for young people to live here in many cases and be attracted to live here. We've got schools which are worse off since the Conservatives have been in government since 2015. We also have a climate emergency which we're trying to deal with locally, and we have a hospital which remains under threat, and there's a review of services in the new year.
Nonsense.
I didn't interrupt you, Alex.
That's not true. You can't say it's not true, Max.
Now I have 10 more seconds. So, my plan. On the NHS, we'd raise income tax by 1p in the pound, and that would bring more money into our NHS, reducing the pressure on hospital services all across the country, and it would make sure that we had enough money to give parity of esteem for mental and physical health care, which is really important. On housing, my campaign locally has meant that we've got £100 million to invest in 500 homes for young people and families, which is a key challenge for our town and the businesses within it too, because they need to know that they can attract and keep young talent here. The Liberal Democrats would reverse cuts to schools, and by the end of the Parliament we have £10.7 billion more going into our schools, which would mean Cheltenham schools were better off. And on the climate, we've declared a local climate emergency thanks to my work, and we now have a roadmap to carbon neutrality for Cheltenham by 2030. And there's a huge amount of detail behind that, which will include things like ensuring that we've got solar panels in our car parks to produce renewable energy, ensuring that we are investing in sustainable transport, like George mentioned, ensuring that we're planting trees across our town, but working with others to plant trees outside of Cheltenham too, like the Woodland Trust, so we can plant, hopefully, as Cheltenham people, 1 million trees across our country, so we can do our bit to fight the climate emergency in Cheltenham and do our bit to contribute to the international efforts too.
Could we have a question from Graham Beale? Graham Beale, could you put your hand up, please? Good and high. Thank you very much. Microphone coming down to you, so everyone can hear.
Hi everyone. My question is very short and very simple. Will you support no-deal Brexit?
Will you support a no-deal Brexit? That is the question.
No, I will not support a no-deal Brexit. To expand briefly on the Labour Party's position in a little more detail, we believe that the current deal which has been negotiated by the Conservative Party has fundamental issues. It puts a border down the Irish Sea, it pushes us in the direction of a looser relationship with our partners in Europe, and doesn't provide the sort of protections we want to see on our critical commitments on environmental standards and on workers' rights. So we would spend 3 months renegotiating with the European Commission a closer Brexit deal, one which involves single market and customs union access, and actually ensure that our essential commitments on issues like workers' rights, and most especially environmental commitments, were protected into the future. We then put this back to a second referendum with a binding outcome with either the deal which we would have prepared or a Remain option. Personally, in that referendum, I would campaign for Remain, as I'm a believer that remaining in the European Union is the best option for our country. But what this offers, I believe, is an opportunity for a healing exercise. And as the Labour Party would implement whatever result, we would be certain, going forward into the future, that we would be able to maintain that close relationship with Europe, even in the result that people decide that leaving is the best way forward, and would allow us to get Brexit resolved within those 6 months, as actually our deal would already have a future partnership with Europe in mind, whereas the Conservatives' current deal requires an ongoing negotiation over the next year and most likely beyond in order to establish that relationship.
I did vote out, and I like to think I'm a Democrat. I voted in every election since 1966. I know I don't recall. And since then, a lot of times, the government of the day had more that didn't vote for them than did, and we've accepted it. We had a vote, it may have been a bad vote for both sides, but more voted out. So I thought we voted out, so we should stick with what we voted for. But as I'm unlikely to get into Parliament, but I said, I like to think I'm a Democrat, and we had a vote, and more voted out than voted in. I think that's...
Thank you. I'm pleased you asked this question because in a year's time, despite the rhetoric of getting Brexit done in this election, we are faced with the reality of having the same debate about whether we are faced with a no-deal Brexit yet again. And I think we need to be very clear about this. What is on offer from the Conservatives at this election, getting Brexit done, is a fantasy. In a year's time, we are faced with a no-deal Brexit scenario again. And Brexit will go on and on and on and on and on. It will not surprise you to hear that as the Liberal Democrat candidate, I want to stop Brexit. The most likely outcome of this election is not a Liberal Democrat victory, although it can be in Cheltenham, and as your next MP, I will support a referendum in Parliament to ensure that we can give people a say on the final Brexit deal. And I promise you that I will campaign unequivocally for Remain when that referendum comes, and I really hope we do it. And the reason I will be campaigning for Remain is because we all know that this country is going to be worse off if we leave the European Union. There is not a single economic forecast that says we will have more money to spend on the public services that we all cherish if we're out of Europe. At a cautious estimate, if we stay in the European Union for the next 5 years, we will have £50 billion more to spend on public services. And that goes to the heart of the debate at this election, because the other parties are offering a potential Brexit which will make us worse off and which will mean that their pledges on public service spending are simply undeliverable. So I would urge you to vote Liberal Democrat, so I will be able to go to Parliament and argue for you to have a say on the Brexit deal, and so we can work together to overturn the result and make sure that we end this madness.
'48 was a mandate to leave the European Union, but to leave with a deal, it seemed to me. And the great tragedy of the last 3 years has been that on every occasion when Parliament could have done its duty to compromise, to come together, to deliver with a deal, it has missed that opportunity. It failed to vote for Theresa May's deal 3 times. And then when it came to the indicative votes process, which I accept, by the way, should have happened a long time earlier, and the tragedy is that people's views have become set in concrete. But what was so frustrating is that so many of the people who are now saying, and then were saying, no deal will be a disaster, it will be a tragedy for this country, they didn't vote for any deal which would have removed that possibility. Didn't vote for Theresa May's deal 3 times, didn't vote for the Norway option, didn't vote for the EFTA option, didn't vote for the customs union option, and instead said, and boasted about it, that they have decided to take the stance that on the day after that result, they would do everything possible to overturn it. Now, I'm afraid I don't see that as a moderate compromise position. I see that as an extreme position. And the stated aim to say that if you were to gain a majority, you're just going to cancel the whole thing, I'm afraid does not put a stop to this. It pours petrol on the flames. I am standing because there is a deal. The chance for us to leave in good order. And I don't say for a second that if you vote Conservative that everything is sorted overnight, but we will have taken one giant step towards the new normal. We will have moved on to what the next options must be. And yes, there will be some bits that are good, some bits that are less good, but we have to move on. And understand this, if you will. The paralysis itself is incredibly damaging for our country. If we don't move on, have that second referendum, the world will look on aghast, businesses will tear their hair out, and the misery will never end.
Well, he took us 2 minutes as he wished to. Next question from Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis. You're Anthony Davis? All right. It begins with talking about catastrophic floods.
Can you hear me? Okay. Catastrophic floods in Yorkshire, forest fires in California and Australia, Victoria Falls reduced to a triple due to drought in Southern Africa, China building 49 new coal-fired power stations, vast amounts of time consumed by Brexit, which will continue. We had for economic and environment collapse, yet there is no discussion of any of this in the election. Why not? And what action needs to be taken if you are to have any sort of sustainable solution, or is it already too late?
Well, to be honest, I think it's too late. Having been a fireman, I've done many floods in Cheltenham and Gloucester over the years, and privileged to know that many of the crew that saved Gloucestershire and the electric power station in 2007. I was talking to an Australian in a terrible fire there, and it's not even their fire season yet, so I'm afraid we've arrived early. What we can do, I don't know. We've got to get Donald Trump in America, China, possibly Russia, perhaps some of the African or poor nations. We've got to stop them producing. Sadly, my father was a miner in the 20s and 30s, but coal, unless they can do so much, scientists can do something with it. But I think it's arrived, and we must try and do more. I'd like to see more wave power. I'm surprised, because tide goes in and out every day, guaranteed. Wind power, we don't know if it's going to blow, and sun, well, sun in Great Britain, certainly not in the winter, or not much. But wave power, not tidal. They did suggest doing it in the Severn. That would cause a travesty of nature. But wave power around the country, then you can get turbines. We must listen to scientists and what they can do. But sadly, the gentleman, I think, has arrived. And if we don't get countries like the USA, China, and Russia talking, we're going to be in a worse mess. So, I think someone mentioned solar power on all the houses. I've got it on my house. I would like to sort of get a little wind thing, but I don't think they're that good, not the smallest. But solar panels on all the houses would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you'll be relieved to hear there was a climate emergency Hustings that the Extinction Rebellion group put on the other night, so it is being talked about, and it's one of those things where I believe it is now seeping into the national debate in a way it wasn't about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think we all need to be conscious of the fact that there is some degree of political consensus that there is actually a problem to solve. However, it is of course very easy as a politician to stand up and evangelise without any kind of proper plan to solve a problem, and just to reflect on the kind of debate that we're having in the country, it was notable that Boris Johnson didn't show up to the only climate change national debate on television, was replaced by a lump of ice, I believe, which slowly melted. Shame indeed. Shame indeed.
Michael Gove could have come.
Well, Michael Gove turned up. But I think one of the reasons I got into politics, I know one of the reasons I got into politics was because I'm a passionate environmentalist. My father took me along to tree plants when I was a child, and some of my earliest memories are doing things that were to do with environmental activism. So when I became a councillor, I wondered how I could help on this. So I started off by talking about sustainable transport and became Cheltenham's walking and cycling champion. Most recently, I've made sure that we've got a plan in place for a carbon neutral Cheltenham. So I've got a record of action on that. And the Liberal Democrat plan at this general election is for a carbon neutral Britain by 2045 at the very latest, with staging posts to ensure we're pushing ourselves in the meantime. And planting 60 million trees across our country, ensuring that we're investing in renewable energies, which is one of the key achievements of the Liberal Democrats while we were in coalition government. And I think it is important that in this election we look at who has a clear, costed and comprehensive plan. The Liberal Democrats have that, and it even includes aviation. And I would urge everyone to look at the various track records of the candidates putting themselves in front of you when you are casting your vote, because the environment is a key issue at this election. It is not just a key issue, it is the key issue. Thank you.
I actually echo a lot of that, and I think it's incredibly important, by the way, when we're dealing with something of this significance, that we try to find as much consensus as we can. So I introduced into Parliament, long before, by the way, Extinction Rebellion had even been talked about, the Net Zero Climate Bill, for us to achieve and legally require net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But that figure didn't emerge from a clear blue sky. It came because of the overwhelming consensus of scientists in October last year at the meeting of the IPCC, which said that if we as a planet want to meet the Paris climate goals of less than 2 degrees warming, we hope to try to get 1.5 degrees, is we have to have a net zero planet by 2050. It's important to take note of what has been achieved in this country. Compared to 1990 levels, our emissions are down by a full 42%, but we are responsible for about 1% of global emissions. And as the point was made elsewhere, China, I think it was by George, China responsible for about 25% of global emissions, and yet their emissions are not forecast to peak until 2030. And so the reality is that we must show leadership, but it's also correct to note that unless the massive polluters start to have an impact, then this will be an extremely difficult exercise. And the most chilling statistics that came out recently is that the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, way over 400 now parts per million, which is about 200 parts per million more than it was in pre-industrial era. So what are we going to do? Well, to meet 2050, we've got the Committee on Climate Change that will hold the government to account to make sure we do tough things like, from 2025, any new building, including anything which goes into Cheltenham Cyber Park, can't have a gas boiler anymore. It's going to have a heat pump or an air pump or something like that. We will phase coal out completely by 2025. We already went for 18 days in this country this year without burning a single piece of coal. That's what we need to do. It's going to be tough, but it is critical for the future of our country, for our planet, and indeed for humanity.
The climate for me is absolutely the number one issue at this election, because we're possessed now of an opportunity to set our direction in this country and on this planet, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 30. The Conservative Party says we have to get down to net zero carbon emissions nationally by 2050, and I say that's not soon enough. The Liberal Democrats say net zero carbon emissions nationally by 2045, and again, it's not soon enough. Net zero carbon emissions by 2030 is a credible target, and it is one the Labour Party has a fully costed plan to achieve. We're going to achieve this by building tidal power on the coast, as George correctly identified, rather than in rivers. It's about making sure that offshore wind is massively expanded over the next 5 years. Onshore wind is allowed again after being banned under the recent Conservative government, that fracking is banned outright from day one of the Labour government. It's about making sure that we get 2 million solar panels on the roofs of homes of the poorest people in this country. It's about making sure that insulation is provided to those homes which are currently under-insulated, not just so that we can meet our net zero carbon emissions target, but also so that the lives of everyday people can be improved by this. The point of China and their emissions has been brought up several times, but how do you persuade a big polluter to pollute less? You show leadership. You show that you can get down to net zero carbon emissions, grow your economy, and develop into the future. It's about showing that these alternative technologies aren't just speculatively possible, they're very really possible. I believe that Britain has not only a great opportunity to lead through our history of leadership in this planet, but actually has a moral responsibility to do so. We kick-started the first industrial revolution which got us into this mess in the first place. Now it's our responsibility to lead this planet out of it again by showing leadership, by getting down to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, by kick-starting that green industrial revolution which will allow us not just to reform our industrial production, but just like the first industrial revolution did, every single element of our society, from the way we relate to each other to the way that our democracy is taken forward. So that is what we have to do, net zero by 2030, and only the Labour Party is promising that at this election.
Can I ask T.C. Boxer to ask their question? Thank you.
Hello, I didn't think you'd ask me. It's a very short question. For 300 years we have been the United Kingdom. Does it matter if Brexit?
Well, I might not need 2 minutes for this. Of course it matters. Brexit poses a threat to not just our position in the European Union, but to the UK. And we know that for two key reasons. One is that Boris Johnson's Brexit deal proposes a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. And two, we know that Scotland wishes to remain in the European Union. So, if the UK leaves the European Union, we will only see more threats of Scotland leaving England and Wales and Northern Ireland and trying to become an independent nation. And I think that the strength of our nation is when we work together as England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We must not allow a situation to occur where Scotland wishes to be a separate nation. We must not allow a situation to occur where Northern Ireland is annexed from the rest of the UK and has special rules, which risks a return to the Troubles, which have not been seen since I was a child. That's just one of the many reasons that we need to stop Brexit at this election.
I'm a passionate unionist. I do believe in the slogan from 2014 that we're better together. But there are two things that emerge. I would have more sympathy with the argument that was just made if that opportunity had been taken at the time of the indicative votes, which missed, by the way, by just 3 votes to vote for a customs union. And I do think that was an important thing because, by the way, that would have solved the situation in Northern Ireland. It would have solved any concerns that Spirex might have had or G Aviation about how you have frictionless trade. And yes, of course, hang on. Yes, it would, of course, have potentially tempered the ability to do trade deals, but I personally felt that was a price worth paying. But we now find ourselves in a situation where that offer is not now on the table. And so we have to ask ourselves a question. Fundamentally, where do we go from here? And I'm afraid if we learned anything from the 2014 referendum in Scotland, is that the repercussions of that, the enmities that were created, the toxicity that divided communities and which remain in that society would only be continued a fortiori, as lawyers would say, if there was a second referendum on European Union, again here in the overall United Kingdom. So I say this, if you look at the figures in Scotland, it's fascinating in this election itself, that you have 2 currents going on in Scotland at the moment. Those who, as you say, might want to have a second referendum on Europe. But the feelings for the union itself, of the United Kingdom, remain strong itself. And my prediction is that actually that will remain, whatever happens, whether we remain in the European Union or out, that the strength of our union will endure. And it will endure because it is the most successful union in Western democracy. I want it to endure, but let me be clear, if those who had seriously wanted to save our union, if they had spoken up at the time, this could all have been solved a long time ago.
I absolutely do think it does matter. Our union is something which I value very deeply, and the diversity which we see from these 4 nations within our one United Kingdom is something which is very important to me and something we should seek to protect. The discussion has gone on to Brexit more generally here, so I'll make a quick point about how Labour's deal could ensure this. By actually making sure there is no hard border down the Irish Sea, or border of any kind down the Irish Sea, thus pushing Northern Ireland away, and actually ensuring a close future partnership with the European Union, I believe that it has a far better chance as a leave deal of ensuring that actually our United Kingdom stays together and that we can leave as a whole and move forward progressively in that way, working still with our European partners. And of course, if in a confirmatory referendum the vote was instead for Remain, then the issue would, in that sense, be avoided. So that's all I have to say.
I think Scotland wanted to leave the United Kingdom before Brexit raised its head. I believe that's what I think. But I would not like to see the Union break up. But like any change, there will be a dip before you rise up again. Once we are on our own, we can make our own decisions and we can go forward. But the question was, would I like to see the Union break up? No, I wouldn't. And because I'm proud to be British, proud to be English, I'm proud to be in Gloucestershire, but I'm proud to be British most of all. Thank you.
Can I invite Nicola Barr to give her question? Nicola Barr, please, could you put your hand up over there? Thank you.
Hello. My question is, the current state of mental health care in this country is in crisis, as much as the NHS, which has actually affected me personally. In what way will you prioritise mental health in Gloucestershire and the country as a whole?
Okay. That, if I may say so, is an absolutely brilliant point, and I'm very grateful to you for raising it, because the issue of mental health is something that has hit me like a freight train as the MP for Cheltenham. So whether it was going into schools and seeing the increased complexity amongst our young people, or whether it's going on the National Citizenship Service and speaking to the young people about the pressures that they face. And it's because I felt very passionately that whilst we talk a lot about cure, and I'll come on to that in a moment, very little of the conversation was about prevention. Why is this happening in the first place? And that's why I set up with the Children's Society and Young Minds an inquiry into the impact of one aspect, and I accept it's just one aspect of our modern lives, and that was the impact of social media on adolescent mental health, particularly cyberbullying and so on. And that has led into what is going to be a green paper to try to better calibrate how we have this relationship with social media in our lives. But you ask about cure, because that's a critically important thing. So in Cheltenham, for example, we now have the benefit of many of our schools being part of the Mental Health Trailblazer scheme, which means that mental health teams are attached to schools to provide that urgent care then and there, so they don't have to be taken down to A&E, which is not necessarily the right place. But the second thing is we now have 24/7 mental health crisis nurses in both CGH and GRH, and that's a critically important thing too. But the third point is you are fundamentally right. We need to recognise there has been this surge in demand and to ensure that the resources are there. So as part of the additional £20 billion in real terms, to put that in context, the entire prisons budget is about £4 billion. So £20 billion a year increase going into the NHS. A significant proportion of that is going to be going into mental health to ensure that there is true parity of esteem. But I would just make this point, of course. We have to ensure that there isn't just good mental health care for this generation, but for the next one as well. And if we don't have that sustainable economy, there is a danger that the great public services that we have now will not be enjoyed by a future generation that will be bankrupt. Thank you. Thank you.
The Labour Party's response to this is a comprehensive one. So first, we want to invest further in the NHS with a £26.5 billion in real terms investment fund to rescue the NHS and turn it around. It's about providing additional funding in the form of £1.6 billion to set new standards for mental health, providing expert wards, expert nurses and other essential care providers at the crisis stage as well as at the pre-crisis stage to ensure that mental health is something which is analysed across the NHS. It's not just something which is dealt with in an emergency situation. It's about making sure that we also ensure that the mental health of our children is put front and centre stage of any such policy. And that's why we have an £845 million fund assigned in order to ensure that there are more school counsellors available and more counsellors available in workplaces for young people to make sure that from the very beginning people are able to access the essential mental health services which are required across our society. It's It's about making sure that our new Ministry of Employment Rights will be able to encourage businesses to set up comprehensive schemes to ensure that their employees' mental health was cared for, both in terms of the work that was required of them, the work-life balance that they were required to achieve, and also by ensuring there was provision there when a counsellor was required for that counsellor to be available. Finally, it's about making sure that some of the pressures we see in our society which induce people to undergo mental health crises are removed. It's about making sure that no one has to worry about the very basics of their life, and it's about making sure also that our youngest children aren't faced with unnecessary SATs tests, which is something the Labour Party would seek to end in our youngest children. Finally, in schools more generally, it's about ending the teach-to-test culture and making sure that the focus is on quality learning, not simply rote learning. And through this comprehensive policy, we've been ensuring that mental health is improved in schools, in workplaces, and right across our society.
It is a serious disability. To be honest, I do not understand it greatly, but it is a serious disability. As I've already said, for 3 years I actually convinced myself I was dead and being punished for all the wicked things I'd done. I hated waking up every morning. But as I mentioned, with the help of friends and Dancing Ken Hanks, brought me back from the brink of suicide and depression. I may say something that's not very acceptable to many of you, especially being in the church, but why are we locking up serious cases of murderers for all their life costing millions, if not billions of pounds, when the NHS is struggling for funds, especially for mental health? I know it's a very serious issue, and you have to make with all the technology nowadays, but these people who just go out and murder our British soldiers, and that man who killed 2 people, who were trying to help him, I just cannot understand why we keep all these alive and we're letting the National Health struggle for money. It costs a lot of money. I know there's a lot of against it. That's just my opinion. Because the National Health, we're letting people die in the National Health Service, keeping murderers alive. That's my own opinion. But I think mental health is very serious, and along with all other national health disabilities, it should be on the top. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, mental health and the reform of mental health care is at the very heart of what the Liberal Democrats are offering on our health policies at this election. It's simply not right that if you have a mental health care issue, which means that you're feeling like you might kill yourself, or you're feeling as if you can't go on, that is not treated with the same level of urgency as it is if you've broken your arm or broken your leg. That situation is not tenable, and that needs to be put to a stop. And the Liberal Democrats would do that by increasing income tax by just 1p in the pound, making sure we had £7 billion per year extra going into our NHS. That money would be ring-fenced, and we would ensure that that gave parity of esteem for mental and physical health care, as has been mentioned by others on the panel. But that isn't simply the solution here. We need to have minimum waiting time standards for people who have mental health care issues. We need to make sure that people who are being treated over the long term have close to home treatment rather than being sent to the other end of the country. There are some absolute horror stories if you look out there, people who are from Cornwall being sent to Lincolnshire as an example. We also need to make sure that there is a specific issue here that's being dealt with about LGBT+ mental health, and make sure that there are proper mental health services for the LGBT+ community. And schools were mentioned by George, and this is a really important point, because at the moment we don't measure, as part of the schools inspection regime, well-being in schools. And introducing that as part of a new Inspectorate of Schools regime would make a huge difference to young people's mental health. So this is a huge issue that we need to deal with. It touches more people than we think. About 1 in 4 people every year come into contact with mental health services. And that's why I'm proud that the Lib Dems are putting it at the very centre of our offer at this general election.
Roger Simon with a question question from Roger Simon.
It's a question about foreign affairs policy in regard to Israel-Palestine. Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, of which the UK and Israel are signatories, makes it illegal for an occupying power to transfer its own citizens to territory it has occupied. Israel, however, continues to build settlements inside the occupied Palestinian territories, and even regards them now as Israeli territory. Like most other countries, the UK government has deplored this continuing building of settlements in the West Bank, but has not taken action to uphold Palestinian rights. What measures would you propose to require Israel to comply with international law?
So I'd say that the Labour Party, through our additional investment in our diplomatic service and in our Foreign Office generally, will be able to ensure that we are able to apply additional diplomatic pressure and more directed diplomatic pressure through the hiring of new diplomats and through other essential modifications of that kind. By protecting our existing relationship with the European Union and protecting our position within the United Nations, we'll be able to work collectively with nations across the globe to apply appropriate pressure there too. But also, looking towards the future, we need to ensure that Britain is advocating for a clear two-state solution with a free Palestine and a free and secure Israel, which can work together for peace in the region, and indeed the Labour Party will continue to work for peace across our planet.
I've always tried to help people. I cannot comprehend how these countries after 2,000 years are still fighting. I don't, to be honest, don't know the answer. We can only persuade, but there's 6 of one and half a dozen of the others, because when Israel does stop bombing or shooting the Palestinians, they send rockets over and start again. To be honest, you know, it's an ongoing thing, and all nations should ask both of them to try and sort it out. Of course, when Yasser Arafat was there, they were always obviously attacking Israel, and Israel, they said, if you attack us, we'll attack you back. But to be honest, I don't know what the answer is. All you can do is through the United Nations, keep asking them to comply with international law. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all agree that it's a tragedy there's been so much violence in this region. And the only way that we're going to end it is with a negotiated two-state solution, which will include the recognition of the state of Palestine. This is, of course, a matter for the United Nations to sort out, and liberalism and international cooperation has always been a supporter of international rule of law. And if we don't use those as our guiding principles, then I'm afraid we're not going to solve this problem. I've had 30 seconds, and I've neatly summed up what I'm going to say, so that's it. Thanks.
Well, look, I'm going to be pretty robust about this. So, Israel has the right to exist, Israel has the right to defend itself, but Israel does not have the right to breach international law. And let us be crystal clear that the settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal. And they're illegal, as I say, under international. I've been there myself, and I've seen the fact that there is something like 400,000 people, settlers, living in occupied territory. I've been to Ma'ale Adumim, which is an absolutely clear settlement there, which has got all the sanitation and all the attributes you would expect of a modern, thriving city. But it is a burning injustice, and we should call it out. But Roger, of course, asks the excellent point, says, well, that's enough, he effectively says, but what else are you going to do about it? And that is an extremely difficult question, frankly. British troops are not going to be there. We're not going to be getting into a hot war into the Middle East, let's be clear about that. So it is going to be a diplomatic route. And we have to recognise as a nation that we are not the power that we were in 1917, at the time of the Balfour Declaration, or indeed the period after the First World War and subsequently. We have to work in concert with other nations. But what we will not do is move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We will not do that. And we will continue to speak out against this injustice and against home demolitions as well. This does not mean we are not a friend of Israel. Israel is a great nation of extraordinary innovation. But I have to tell you that I fundamentally disagree with the policy of the Israeli government when it comes to settlements. We should be brave in this country, that we speak up for fairness, we speak up for justice, and where we see that injustice, we will continue to call it out loud and clear.
Could I invite Hope Halstead to ask their question? Hope Halstead to ask their question. Thank you. Microphone down here. Childcare provision.
I believe that all the parties are offering increased childcare provision. From your perspective, is your goal to get more parents in work, or is it to improve child development prospects? Because the two tend to be mutually exclusive. If you're doing it to get parents into work, you need long hours and lots of flexibility. And if you're doing it for childcare development, usually it's small, very high quality interventions to raise developmental objectives.
Sadly, I've never been married having my accident before I found the right girl. I do not greatly like children. I do like making them laugh and telling them silly jokes. But I've watched on the television that they come up with this and that. If you want to get mums back to work, and you've obviously got to have childcare. I went to school in 1947 when I was 3 because my dad was on nights, and for some unknown reason he thought I made a lot of noise. But it's a serious issue, childcare. If we can find the money for it, all the better. But obviously I can't speak a great deal on it. But children need to learn from a young age what is good and what is bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the answer is I hope we can do both of those things, actually. At this election, the Liberal Democrats have a really good policy on childcare, and I was happy to see it because about 2 months ago I went into Hatherley Preschool and spoke to Justine, who is the leader of Hatherley Preschool, and she explained at great length the pressures that there are in the preschool industry, which are forcing so many of them to consider going out of business. I'm not going to reveal what she said her take-home pay was in the last year, but it absolutely staggered me that a woman who was doing so much good work to make sure that our children were looked after during the day was taking home so little money, and we should all be ashamed of that actually. On the point about what we're actually going to do, the Lib Dems have a really good policy here. So at this election, we're going to fully fund 35 hours of childcare per week for 48 weeks of the year for children from 9 months to 2 years. And we will fully fund it, and that will be around about £7 an hour. Justine told me that actually preschools get about £4.30 an hour in Gloucestershire, which really isn't good enough, particularly when you consider that the minimum wage has gone up so much in recent years, which of course is a good thing. We want an increased minimum wage. However, if the amount that preschools are getting per hour doesn't go up by the same amount, then they're forced out of business, which is why we are where we are. And if you look at the pressures we put on families, it's something like £6,600 a year for the care of an under 2-year-old at nursery, which is just not sustainable if you want young mums, primarily young mums, to be able to go back into the workforce and do things like bust that gender pay gap, which we've got a huge problem on. And that fully funded provision is the most important point. But also we need to be channeling more money into those children who are coming from poorer backgrounds, which is why the Lib Dems are going to treble the pupil premium for early years, meaning that there's even more money going into preschools in the areas that are serving children from deprived backgrounds. So that's our offer at this election, and I agree with you. It's an issue, but we need to do both.
Well, on the issue of the offer, so let's have everyone set up their stalls. So what the Conservatives are saying is that we are going to double free childcare to 30 hours per week, And of course, it wasn't very long ago that there was nothing, absolute zilch. So that is really important, and there's about £3 billion a year which is now going into that. And as I say, the context is we spend £4 billion on all our prisons, so a lot of money is going into it. But I detected, I may be wrong, that you were asking a kind of philosophical question as well, which is about, for mothers, should we as a state be saying, right, that's it, we have set up our state, so you must go straight back into work, even though for some, they'll say, do you know what, that's not right for me, it's not right for my child, it's not right for the decision that I want to make, taking it all into account. And I do think that we have to be careful as a nation to ensure that women, and indeed men, but particularly women, feel that society will support them in the choices they make. And it won't necessarily be for them that they want to get straight back into work, but if they choose to do so, then they must be supported to do so. But I do want to raise this issue a little bit about how we reward people as well, because there was an issue about paying people properly. That is important. I just want to take a small point as well, that money that's gone in will save families about £5,000 a year. That's important with the cost of living. And on this issue of a penny on income tax, which I'll just deal with briefly, don't forget that the average couple in Cheltenham, both earning £28,000 a year, if you put a penny on income tax for them, they will have to find from their budget an additional about £320 a year. So there are costs to this. So all I'm saying is that we should be very careful about ensuring that we're helping people with the costs of care and not giving with one hand and taking with another, and always respecting the right and the individual autonomy of mothers to make the decisions in the best interests of their family and their child.
I'll deal first with the underlying philosophical point before moving on to some of the more specific policy details that the Labour Party has on offer. We also believe that ultimately the decision of whether you want to go straight back to work or remain with your child for longer is something which should be left up to the parents of that child. And that's why we've been ensuring that while there will be on offer 30 hours of free childcare a week for every 2 to 4-year-old, with additional subsidies available to ensure that children both younger and older than that can have that childcare if the parents would like it, can afford it otherwise, we'll also be making sure that actually it's quite possible for a parent to stay at home with their child for as long as they wish to do so. First, we'll be increasing maternity leave to 12 months in order to ensure that actually that greater space is available in those very earliest years to make sure that that is something which is an expected and normal part of society, and that employers can be legally forced to ensure that that's quite possible for an individual parent to choose. We'll also be making sure that we're increasing the minimum wage to £10 so that a single person's income will be capable of supporting a wider range of activities for a child. We'll also be making sure that we end the current benefits cap so that those who require an additional supplemental income in order to make that decision to remain at home with their child can afford to do so. And finally, through the setting up of our Ministry of Employment Rights, which will audit the policies that companies have in relation to dealing with childcare parents who are taking time off for childcare, that there is proper protection and that parents who have chosen to take time off for their child won't be subject to any sort of unfair sanction or even loss of their job as a result of that. So it will be this sort of comprehensive policy so that ultimately the decision is left with the parents and they can have the very highest quality of childcare, whether they wish to provide it directly themselves or through childcare provision of the state. Finally, on the quick point that's been raised about the penny on income tax, the Labour Party recognises that this would be an injustice, making average people pay more, and that's why we're confining our tax rises to the very wealthiest 5% in our society and the very largest multinational corporations to make sure that those with the broader shoulders pay their fair share and make sure that this country is one which works for the many, not the few.
Can I ask Mike Scott Bowen to ask his question? Mike Scott Bowen, the microphone. Thank you.
In Britain, we imprison a higher proportion of our population than any other country in Western Europe, yet we have a 50% re-offending rate of people who are sent back to prison. What reforms would your government make to the criminal justice system?
Great question.
That's a very good question. I think the starting point is we should not be locking up people for short sentences and putting them in prison where they simply learn to become criminals in the longer term. That goes to the heart of where we get this wrong in this country, and that is why we have prisons that are overflowing in cramped conditions where people who are prisoners are treated inhumanely in a way that the state should not be doing so. And that is the heart of the problem that we've got here, because if you lock people up where they don't need to be locked up and they could take part in community punishments instead, then you are setting those people on a life of crime, particularly if those people are in their more formative years, going into jail when they're in their teens or early 20s. So that's the starting point. Another issue here which we need to consider at greater length is restorative justice. Now, I believe it is incredibly powerful for victims of crime and perpetrators of crime to sit in the same room, talk to one another, and that enables them to go through a healing process, on both sides actually, I think it's very powerful if the perpetrator of the crime is there and they can see the pain and the hurt that they have caused. Now, I was recently a victim of crime. I won't go into the details of what it was. I've asked for restorative justice. I didn't ask for the person to be sent to magistrates' court, where they might have been locked up for a short sentence, even though I know that they had a previous record of crime, because I believe that I need to live my values. So on this one, I'm saying we don't lock people up, and I think we go for restorative justice, and we end short sentences. Thank you.
And I take a slightly different view on that. I've spent a lot of time in the courts prosecuting everything from really low-level crimes at the beginning of my career up to bomb plots, counter-terrorism, and all sorts of very, very serious matters, murders, rapes, horrible offences like this. And I have to say, I think there is actually the role for the short sentence, because sometimes there can be moments where the poor old magistrates are sitting there at Cheltenham Magistrates Court, and someone has come in and they have they've stolen on the 15th occasion, they've breached every community order, they simply aren't in the position, they are either unwilling or unable to respond to and respect the order of the court, and there has to be that ultimate sanction. But I would just say this, I also believe that there can be times when the criminal justice system acts in an asinine way, and indeed when there was a proposal to make those who are on their uppers and they've been convicted to actually pay a £1,000 criminal courts charge simply for the privilege of using the courts, even though that might tip them into the very crisis that caused it. We spoke out about that on the Justice Select Committee and we ended it, and it brought an end to it. So it's got to be a sensible approach. But you raise a really interesting issue about the level of rehabilitation that can take place in prisons. One of the things I've spoken out about on the Justice Select Committee is some prisoners were being held in their cells for 23 hours a day. That is absurd. It's an absolute absurdity, and of course they can't be rehabilitated. So the short answer is, you've got to ensure that there are more prison officers, and they are now being recruited. You've got to make sure also that there is the opportunity for sensible rehabilitation and constructive work inside custody as well. And you have to have a more modern prison estate as well. That doesn't mean, I'm afraid, necessarily that we should be saying that people don't deserve to be in prison. Some have robbed innocents, they've betrayed trust, and they've destroyed lives. And I'm afraid sometimes they need to be kept in custody. But it should not be inhumane. You judge a society by the way it treats its prisoners, and that means having enough staff in our prisons and enough rehabilitation opportunities.
After the last 9 years, we've seen that our criminal justice system and indeed our prison system has gone from being the envy of the world to something which is fundamentally not working for us in this society. You've correctly identified that ultimately we have to move towards a model focused on rehabilitation, not simply on punishment. And we've got to make sure that actually this is done not just through sentences in a custodial sense, but also through robust community sentences, making sure that people can be reintroduced to society and make sure that actually they are paying back for their crime to the society they harmed, rather than wasting huge amounts of money on keeping non-violent offenders in prison for very, very short sentences. It's about making sure that we undo the devastating legal aid cuts that we've seen over the last 9 years to make sure that people who are not being forced into destitution, into stealing and the like, in order to pay for their own legal representation. It's about making sure that we not only undo the privatisation of the probation service, which has seen the ridiculous situation we've seen where we've had very serious offenders being accidentally released and people who have done very little wrong being kept in for far longer than they should have been. It's about also making sure that as that probation service is developed over a Labour government, it's one which focuses on rehabilitating people and making sure that they can be slowly and safely reintroduced in our society, both at the end of custodial sentences and in the place of custodial sentences. We've got to make sure that for the very most serious offenders, for violent and sexual offenders especially, that we're keeping robust prison sentences, but that while those robust prison sentences are being applied, they're inside prisons which are modern, which are focused on rehabilitation, and which have enough prison officers to make sure that both the prisoners themselves are safe, and that prison officers are not subject to the consistent and horrific assaults which we have seen ongoing in our prisons over the last few years due to the devastating cuts that have been made both to our prison estate budget and to our prison officer budget.
Unfortunately, there are bad people out there which need locking up. However, I think there, as already mentioned, more compulsory work. We got the flooding back again, have we? More compulsory work with better tagging, because I believe many can take the tags off and still break the law. There are many manual or menial jobs that they could do. I mean, road sweeping, road cleaning, tree cutting. Why lock them up when they could be doing it? Perhaps a small amount of money, but they should be punished for what they've done wrong. And I think that you're saying more work as some more would be good. If you do put people in prison that have perhaps keep reoffending on perhaps minor issues like driving cars without a licence, don't put them with bad people who are on the criminal side, whether you could do that in this overcrowded prison. But we must punish people for doing things wrong. If there's no punishment, people will carry on breaking the law. How many people exceed the speed limit if they don't turn the cameras on, you don't worry about the speed limit. But if you kept getting booked, you start complying with the law. We all break laws somewhere or other, but serious laws, we must punish the people, but more work for those who perhaps smaller crimes. Thank you.
Can I ask David Evans to ask his question? David Evans, could you put your hand up? Thank you.
Budget. I think that the way we deal with it, or the way we allocate it, is fundamentally out of date. So it's set by principles from the 1970s, which said it should all be about assisting development in the developing world. I think the time has come to recalibrate it, so it should be the Department for International Development and Conservation. At the moment, we are precluded from using that budget. Say, for the sake of argument, we wanted to use it to go and protect some of the Brazilian rainforest from the depredations of certain individuals. Say, for the sake of argument, we wanted to use it to increase our marine blue belt around Ascension Island, around Tristan da Cunha, around the Falkland Islands, which, by the way, we already have 91 marine conservation zones. Why can't we go further? Say we wanted to use that money to assist with a plastic recycling scheme out in Asia to stop some of these appalling tides of plastic ending up in the most beautiful rivers in the world. That's what I think we should be doing. So we are already using a considerable sum of money to part of the International Climate Fund. It's gone up to 11.6 billion. I think it would chime much more with the priorities of the British people, and certainly the children in the schools that I visit in Cheltenham time and time again, if we can use the fact that we are an aid superpower, second only to the United States, not just to develop in those poor countries in the world, which it's right, but to balance that with conservation too. That is our international duty, and it should be our international mission too.
Well, if I were to be appointed International Development Secretary, I would count myself very lucky for my extremely rapid promotion.
You'll get there, it's only a matter of time.
And then I would echo entirely almost exactly what Alex has just set out. We are committed as a Labour Party, and I would personally be committed, were I International Development Secretary, to committing our financial resources on development to ensure that development was done in a sustainable way. we could develop and conserve not just the planet, but also target our existing investment to make sure that we're investing in projects which help local communities and at the same time led to greater conservation potential. So projects such as ending desertification in the Sahara Desert, focusing on provision of cleaner water supplies to people around the planet, and also investment in rural and public transport in nations which require it to ensure that they could also move towards a lower carbon vehicle system, whereas presently they're reliant on older, more polluting vehicles. So absolutely it's about ensuring that that aid is targeted, that aid is indeed increased, as I believe we have a very real moral responsibility as a country to help the rest of the world, but also that that aid has a very real diplomatic power for us, and that actually it's about targeting that aid specifically as part of the Green Industrial Revolution at conservation projects.
Do we give money to countries who are civil war with one another? How do we know that money goes to the people who need it? It is a difficult situation, but Live Aid raised millions, I think, was it 100 million? Where has that money gone? Why wasn't that spent on making wells? I went to the Gambia in 1980, if you remember Cooke on the Roots BBC programme, and the poverty there. Living in a village with one well. But where is this money? Every week or day we see an advert, give £2 a week so this person can have water. Surely we've given them water to make, what are the scientists doing? There's water down there somewhere because there's a water table. You might have to dig it a long way and use various pumps, wind power, solar power to get the water up. But yes, we've got to give money to countries who are struggling. When I've had some garage sales when they've had these terrible hurricanes on Jamaica, things like that, and I've given £100, whatever I raised, to that country, we've got to give. But as I say, Africa seems to be the worst because they're so hot and they need water. But get the wells, where's the scientists? We need the scientists, we need to listen to them. And water is life. We are 80% or 90% water. Without water, we die. So we need water in all the countries that haven't got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, some people would have you believe that there's no point in voting for a Lib Dem MP because they can't make any difference. And I'll tell you a story now of a Lib Dem MP who did make a difference. He was a man called Michael Moore, who was the MP for somewhere around the Scottish borders, Roxburgh and Selkirk, I think was his constituency. And he managed to get enshrined in UK law the commitment to spending 0.7% of our GDP on foreign aid. And as a Liberal Democrat and as an internationalist, that is something that makes me hugely proud of my party and its MPs. Going forward, the Liberal Democrats would recommit to that 0.7%, but there are some key things where we need to do more work. And those are around human rights, the promotion thereof, the promotion of democracy, and the promotion of equality. So, and of course the environment as well. So we would increase the percentage of the aid budget that is spent on climate change initiatives, and also the mitigation of the impacts of climate change in places like Africa that have been referred to, and the poorer countries around the world. We would also spend more and refocus the aid budget on gender equality, because in so many countries, women and girls are denied an education, and that does hold back the economies and the cultures of those countries. We would make sure that LGBT+ rights were protected around the world by spending more money on those initiatives as well. And we would develop a global education strategy too. And on democracy, we would make sure that more of our international aid budget was being spent on anti-corruption measures to ensure that those places where they could be enjoying a little bit of a better time, but they've got dictators who are making sure that local people are not able to enjoy their lives, are encouraged in the right direction. Thank you.
Last question tonight, John Horan. Back of the church.
Thank you.
Which party would you vote for?
Well, I'm not sure it's within my power to divine exactly what Jesus would think about any issue, let alone what party to vote for. But I do think that actually a person who's a humble carpenter from Nazareth, who committed his whole life to spending time with people from across cultures, from across our society, from across his society, of all levels of wealth, who spoke out about the need to give what you could to help others, to give time as well as money, is someone who would support the ultimate Labour goal of the idea that everyone in our society should have an equal opportunity, and that there should be a minimum level beneath which no person should fall, and that we should all give as much as we can to build that society together.
Jesus helped people all his life, as did dancing Ken Hanks, so I know who he's going to be. Because I can give £30,000 to Cheltenham Charity. I have talked to Jesus and the Lord many, many times. He kept me sane, he's given me the will to come on, he's given me the will to challenge people who say, you're disabled, we don't want you. And thank you, Lord. And if you want to help the disabled, and you can take non-voters, remember Dancing Ken, please come and collect one. I don't want your vote if you're voting, but please make people, or ask people who say they're not going to vote for the other three because they're not very nice people. I've had words worse than that, but I want to find it because it's some young ladies here. But please help me give £30,000 to charity by getting a third of the non-voters. There's 20,000 that don't vote. So Jesus, thank you and the Lord, thank you for helping me stay sane for 38 years after breaking my neck.
Well, I'm not sure what Jesus would make of Boris Johnson's 10 commandments that he's put out there today. But as an atheist, I probably shouldn't comment. Just as an aside, about a year ago, Nick phoned me up and said, would you like to come and read some of our Service of 9 lessons at the Carols concert? And I said, well, I've got a real theological difficulty with this, Nick, because I think it would be dishonest and it would look like one of those politicians just turning up and grasping for votes. Because as an atheist, I don't believe it's right for me to stand up here and make pronouncements on what Jesus would like us to do, or on what God would like us to do, or on anyone else from any of the other religions. So I will take a step back from this and say, I don't know.
Well, look, I think anybody who starts claiming Jesus for their own party is selling you a pup, and I certainly would never dream of doing that. Although I have to say, I think if Jesus came down on earth and he saw the Brexit crisis, he'd say, right, that's it, I'm off, I'm going back. But look, there was a very interesting point, if I may say so, that George raised, and it's right that some parties have said, well, look, Christianity is more on the centre-left and so on, and I understand the argument, but I would just invite you to consider this, that when we talk about justice, yes, we talk about social justice, and that matters very much indeed. But we must also remember generational justice. The justice that we owe, that contract we owe to the nation, to the generations which are yet to come. And the reason why I make that point is because back in 2007, it might sound like a dry point, but this echoes in through the generations. We had a national debt of about £500 billion. The situation now is we have a national debt of £1.8 trillion. That costs to service each year £50 billion. By the way, the entire schools budget is 43. The entire defence budget is 47. And it means that the next generation, before they can pay for a single school teacher, before they can give a penny in international aid, before they can fund a single soldier or police officer, is going to have to pay that debt. I believe, not just as a father of children, but many here will have children or grandchildren, we have a duty to ensure that the justice we provide to our society is not at the expense of the generations which are yet to come. And I hope that is something that would resonate with Jesus, as indeed with all decent people on this planet. Thank you.
I'm tempted to offer the answer to that question, but maybe I'll keep my counsel on this occasion. Sorry that we've not been able to answer all of your questions tonight. I hope we've been able to answer some of those. Can I thank the candidates for standing, for putting themselves through this? Can I thank them for being part of the conversation tonight and for their brevity? They all kept very much to time. Could you just give them all a round of applause? Have found this evening to be a useful and informative evening, but you may be sitting there thinking, well, it's a lovely gathering space in a pretty church, but I wish they'd turn the heating on. If so, I have some news for you. On the 5th of January, we are embarking on a radical redesign of the interior of this church. We are putting in underfloor heating, we are taking out all of the pews, we are putting in meeting space, we are putting in a kitchen and an office. We have 200 people who enjoy worshipping in this space Sunday by Sunday, but we want this space to be available as a welcoming communal space 7 days a week. We are embarking on a multi-million-pound project. We've raised over 90% of the money we need to do this, but we still have £250,000 to go. Now, I've been doing my sums on how many people are here, and we might not quite make it tonight, but we will be having a retiring collection on the way out. If you would like to be part of that future, a small part of that future, maybe you can have an opportunity to make a donation tonight. If you would like a piece of history, 10 of these pews are still available for sale, and you can speak to somebody if you would like a piece of that history in your own home. If you'd like to see something of the plans, you can see them on the boards at the back. And if we can manage to hold off on having a general election for 12 months, okay, then we can come back in here to a wonderful new space next time we gather here for a conversation such as this. But I would like, just in closing, to close with a prayer for these candidates as they enter this last week of the campaign. If you pray, please make this your own prayer. If you don't pray, just spend a moment reflecting on some of the issues we've been exploring tonight. God of challenge and choice, bless these candidates, we pray, with integrity and endurance, that they may serve this town of Cheltenham and work that all here may know fullness of life. We ask these things through the one who came to us as a child and was revealed as a king, Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all. Thank you for the team who have hosted all of this tonight. Good night and God bless. Thank you.